Hey there nation, and welcome to the show where we help you to play miniatures wargaming on a budget. It is I, Commander Cheapskate, and we're back on that episode of Way of the Underhive. This series is dedicated to helping brand new players to Necromunda build their starting rosters and learn more about the game mechanics of their favorite gangs. And on today's episode we will be discussing Wyrd Powers introduced by the various editions of Necromunda. We'll discuss each Wyrd Power in detail, give our thoughts of the abilities, and explain how it can be used to help you to achieve victory in your next battle report. So these next few series of videos, we're going to get kind of weird. We're going to be talking about Psykers and their roles in Necromunda. We'll also give you a little bit of a briefing of what the Psyker rules detail in this game setting. We'll also talk about in quite a bit all the Wyrd powers that are available in Necromunda as well. We'll talk about each one of those individual abilities and how best to use those in your campaigns and as well as your games on the tabletop. We'll also provide our conclusive thoughts on what we think about this Wyrd power set. And because this video will be a little bit more of a deeper dive, I will put timestamps in the description box down below so that way you can click and navigate to the part of the video that interests you the most. So that being said, let's talk about Wyrd powers. Alright, so give you the rundown real fast of Psykers and Necromunda. First of all, willpower characteristic is going to be key because the lower the willpower score is for your character, the easier it's going to be for them in order to trigger these mental abilities off. Think of it, you basically take 2d6 and you gotta either match or beat the willpower score for your character. Now, about a 7+ willpower is going to basically give you a 50-50 odds of whether you can get your Wyrd powers off or not. You want to be more like in the 6, the 5, the 4 levels, so that way you can continually get your Wyrd powers off, statistically speaking, at a higher level. And of course, if you can't get that low with your willpower scores to either upgrading your character, you could also do so with some very simple actions you can take in the actual tabletop to help you. For example, every single one of these characters do come with the power called Maintain Control. It is a simple action and it's used for continuous effect Wyrd powers that you might use. All you gotta do, of course, is take a willpower test with a 3+ modifier attached to it. If you manage to beat that score, the ability still keeps on going, otherwise it immediately ends. At the same time, if you do need a little bit of boost to your willpower test, you can take a concentrate action with your Psykers, and what that basically is a basic action that adds +1 to your willpower test the next time you roll it. At the same time, you do have to watch out for perils of the warp. If you manage to roll snake eyes when you roll for your powers, there's a couple of bad things that can happen to your characters, kind of like miscasting for your magic in Warhammer the Old World. At the same time, if you have rival Psykers in the opposing gang, of course, all they gotta do is roll 2d6 as well and beat your willpower test. And they're able to do so, that means they disrupt your power and your ability doesn't go off either. Now, when it comes to the perils of the warp, however, like I said before, double ones is the way you actually trigger that event, and it can actually be quite devastating for your Psykers. But we'll talk about that a little bit more in detail here in a second. Lastly, you have two types of Psykers in your gangs. You have a sanctioned Psyker, which is nice because you get to re-roll 1 willpower test per battle, which could be extremely useful. Having that ability to re-roll could be proved quite critical if a situation warrants it. Also, you have for most of your fighters, you'll have what's called the non-sanctioned Psyker special rule, which means if your character gets taken out of action, your opponent earns D3 times 10 credits in order to do so, because they're wanted, dead or alive, basically. And if they get captured, they can be immediately sold if captured as well, so you won't be able to get them back in a rescue mission if that does happen. And lastly, the coolest thing about these game mechanics, of course, is your Psyker's ability to access force weapons. Force weapons are actually just normal mundane melee weapons, but if a post-battle action where you do a sign attunement, if you actually pass that roll, you could actually add the power trait as well as a sever trait to your force weapons, and that only works in the hands of a Psyker. So for those of you guys who are looking for some ways to make your Psykers even deadlier, may I suggest giving them force weapons. Alright, so let's talk about perils of the warp. Whenever you roll double ones or a double 6 when making a willpower test to perform a Wyrd power action, you might actually get the perils of the warp, right? So let's go and talk about what that ends up being. You end up rolling a 2d6, and you get one of basically 5 possibilities. If you roll a 2 to 3, you get what's called a tear in reality, and what that rule states is that the Psyker loses control and warp energy tears reality apart around them. Center a 5-inch blast marker on the Psyker. Any model touched by the marker must pass a willpower test or lose a wound or suffer driver wounded effect, and the Psyker then goes out of action. On a 4 through 5, you have the Immaterium Inverse. The warps inverts upon the attempting to control it. The psyker becomes a target of power regardless of range. If the power is beneficial, the psyker instead becomes prone and pinned and suffers a strength 6 hit that inflicts 2 damage, ignoring armor saves, and the power has no further effects. On a roll of 6 or 8, you get Whispers of the Warp. The psyker's mind is filled with screaming demonic voices. The psyker becomes subject to the insane condition. Place a sanity marker on the psyker's fighter card and roll d6 on the insane table when they activate. On a 9 through 10, you get Warp Surge. The Psyker's power becomes overcharged with warp energy. The Psyker may immediately try to manifest the same power again as a free action, or if they're trying to disrupt the power, they may immediately manifest one of their own powers as a free action. This additional manifestation of the power can trigger Perils of the Warp as normal. After working out the effects of the power, the Psyker becomes prone and pinned and suffers a Strength 4 hit, which inflicts 1 damage. And lastly, from 11 through 12, you have Demonic Possession. Demonic energy courses through the Psyker's body. The Psyker increases their movement, strength, toughness, as well as attack characteristics all by 3, and their weapon skill to 2+. The unarmed attacks inflict 2 damage and have an AP of -1. In the end phase of the following round, or if the Psyker generates this result again, they go out of action. So as you can see, some pretty crazy things can happen with Perils of the Warp as well. It triggers either on a double 1 or a double 6 when you actually try to do willpower tests before Weird Power, or when attempting to disrupt a Weird Power. So psychic abilities are quite nice, but player beware, there are some consequences if you mess up. So first of all, let's talk about the Chaos Cult Wyrd Powers. Now unfortunately, it's not considered a full discipline in itself, so because you don't get any real special ability with it if you decide to spec entirely into the Chaos Cult Wyrd Powers. So unfortunately, no special ability for your witch. But however though, even though that is a bit of a handicap, there are some things that are helping you out that other psychers do not have access to, and that primarily comes in the form of the Chaos Familiar. Chaos Familiars are absolutely fantastic assets to have for your witch, and the reason why is because they offer 2 benefits. The first one, of course, is that they can help you reroll failed willpower tests. So every single time you gotta take a willpower test for your witch and you fail it, your Chaos Familiar allows you to reroll it. And you can take up to 2 of these guys, so you can reroll up to twice if you have to. But the real reason why Chaos Familiars are amazing is because if your witch gets shot at or some kind of attack starts coming their way, all you gotta do is pass a willpower test. If you do that, you ignore that first hit. You have 2 Chaos Familiars, you ignore 2 hits in a row. So that is a reason why those Chaos Familiars are so fantastic. At 25 credits apiece, they are absolutely fantastic. So if you take a Cult Witch in your gang, you should at least, at the very minimum, take 1 Chaos Familiar, but ideally take 2. So that way you can keep your witch alive and actually be very powerful on the tabletop. Another thing I've also noticed with Chaos Cult Witches that is the best way to actually use them is to pair them up with your Chaos Spawn or a Brute that you have in your gang. And the reason why that's the case is because there's some powers that they have in the cult disciplines that can actually help out your Chaos Spawn or Brute and kind of give them some buffs that could really help them out be dominant on the tabletop. Hopefully, though, they'll get actually a fix after seeing the latest books with Ironhead Squat Prospectors, the Hall of the Ancients, and the one coming out for the Ash Waste Nomads called the Book of the Tribes of the Ash Wastes. I think, and I'm kind of hoping that the Chaos Cultists get their own book as well, so that way they can kind of expand upon their discipline. But if not, though, when it comes to this discipline, there is a pretty decent mix of attacks as well as of buffs, so you could actually use both of those to help you out. Unfortunately, though, you kind of get left behind with some of the other psychic disciplines that are out there, and the reason why is because when they made these abilities, this is basically the very first year of, sorry, not first year, I believe it was the 2nd or 3rd year that Necromunda was out during that time, so because of that, they're kind of like a little bit of a power creep going on with their abilities. But with that being said, though, there are still some really good abilities that you could use for your Cult Witch, and we're going to talk about those now. So up number 1 is Pyromancy the Scouring. It's a basic action to trigger this psychic ability, and it reads that coruscating balefire rips from the witch's eyes or outstretched hands, engulfing the enemy. For as long as this weird power is maintained, the Cult Witch counts as being armed with the following weapon. So you have a template weapon that's at strength 2 with 1 damage that has blaze, as well as a template attack as well. Now granted, it's a weaker flamer because only strength 2, but it still causes 1 damage, and you still have a 50-50 chance of hitting people, setting people on fire with blaze. Not to mention, it's a template attack, so it's automatically going to hit whatever aligns with that template as well. Some people don't like the Scouring because they think it's underpowered because it's only strength 2, but even then, you still can set people on fire, and having them scatter because they're being caught on fire for that blaze test, that in itself is worth this ability alone. It gives you really good ability to do crowd control, especially if you're fighting defensively with your witch. You can trigger this as enemies are closing up to your witch. You can use this to kind of scatter enemies, or if you're going to assault a flank, have your witch take point and then use this ability to kind of collapse that flank so that the rest of your gang can kind of sweep in. It's still a very powerful ability in my opinion, and it actually deserves some little respect, even though it's only strength 2. Ability number 2 is Telekinesis, Levitation. It is a basic action uses with a continuous effect. The Cult Witch rises upon invisible, ethereal updrafts floating just above the ground level as they are held aloft by a writhing curtain of warp energy. For as long as this weird power is maintained, the Cult Witch's movement is increased by 3 inches and ignore all terrain, may move freely between levels without restriction, and can never fall. They may not, however, ignore impassable terrain or walls and may not end their movement with their base overlapping an obstacle or another fighter's base. Furthermore, they cannot be pinned, as the Cult Witch is only levitated a few inches above the ground. This ability does not affect lines of sight or the use of cover. Now, when it comes to this ability, it is very situational power because it does give you 8-inch movement, which is great. So that's the one thing about that. If you're fighting in environments where there's a lot of vertical movement, like multiple levels or bridges or things of that nature, this is actually really nice because you can move freely between the levels between them. The only problem with this ability, however, is that you don't really want to commit your Cult Witch to being a close combat fighter. That's not what Cult Witch is designed to do. They're not the greatest fighters at weapon skill 5 and ballistic skill 5, so sending this guy into the press isn't really going to be the thing you want to use this for. So that's the only reason why this power is not as great as it could be, just because your witch is not a great fighter to begin with. Now, if you wanted to actually make your witch into a decent fighter, you could of course spend experience points and make your witch a close combat fighter with increases in strength as well as weapon skill and attacks and all that kind of stuff. In which case, if you use levitation, this could actually be really great to get him charging directly into combat and to fight your enemies. However, though, for the most part, though, it's only really good for doing movement, especially if you're worrying about vertical movement in a battlefield. So that's the only problem with this power, is that it's very situational. Power number 3 is from the Biomancy. It's called Warp Strength. It is a simple action to cast with a continuous effect. It says this witch skin crackles with corpuscent as dark power grants them inhuman potency. For as long as this willpower is maintained, the Cult Witch's strength is increased by 2, and the damage of any close combat weapon attacks they make is increased by 1. So another very situational power, and the reason why that's the case because if you decide to trigger this, it gives your witch strength 5 and adds +1 damage to any close combat attack they do. Now, like I mentioned before, the only problem with this power is that you don't want to commit your witch to a close quarters battle because they're not the greatest fighter with weapon skill 5, only 1 attack. Now, don't get me wrong, if they land that attack, it's going to be brutal, especially if you give them a weapon that gives it bonuses to strength. So something like, for example, like an axe, for example. So now your strike has strength 6 with 2 damage, which could potentially be good. But the problem, though, is that you got a really horrible weapon skill and attack characteristic, right? Now, you could use this, of course, if you spend XP to make your witch a close combat fighter by increasing their weapon skills or their attack characteristics, in which case that could be a really positive thing to have. Or if you wanted to, you could actually use this power more of as a defense measure. So for example, if you get charged against by somebody, you could use this ability to do reaction attacks, so that way you can strike back with a vengeance, for example. In which case, this power could be pretty useful to you as well. And that's and if you don't want to use this power for that ability, you could always go with the Scouring. The Scouring is that template attack. It's a good general purpose attack as well. You can also set people on fire. So that might be something you want to think about. Power number 4 is Telekinesis, also known as the Dark Shield. It's a simple action to do this, and the powerful energies envelop the witch, protecting them and their allies from harm. Until the end phase of this round, add 1 to the result of any save rolls made for the Cult Witch and any other fighter from their gang within 3 inches of them. If they do not have a save roll, they gain a 6+ save. Now, in my opinion, Dark Shield is the #1 power pick out of this discipline. All right, the reason why is because you could really use it to buff your fighters. You have a really decent willpower score, so with a 72.22% success rate, you can add +1 to save rolls for not only your Cult Witch, but for any fighter within 3 inches. This also includes ward saves, as well as skill saves as well. So for example, if there's a fighter with dodge, for example, instead of having a 6-up ward save, it becomes a 5-up ward save. Flak armor becomes 5-up, mesh armor becomes 4-up, etc. The best way to use this, in my opinion, is to pair this up with your Chaos Spawn. So that way they actually have a 6-up armor save to kind of protect them. Or, better yet, if you are dedicated to the Architect of Fate in your cult, which is Zeech, of course, then your Chaos Spawn automatically comes with a 4-up ward save. This ability buffs up to a 3+ ward save, which is another reason why you should always pick the Architect of Fate for Necromunda, in my opinion, because, you know, your gang is primarily a shooting gang, and this is a nice way to kind of buff yourself as well. So that's the reason why I believe this is a number 1 pick on that one. Or, of course, if you don't have a Chaos Spawn with you, you just have normal fighters, you can still give them +1 to their armor saves, or give them a 6-up armor save if they have none already. So, something to think about as well. The ability just for it to kind of nerf a little bit the armor-piercing characteristics of some weapons is benefit enough. So, if you do end up taking a Cult Witch, my opinion is probably take Telekinesis. It's probably going to be the most useful ability for your gang. Power number 5 is from Telepathy. It's called Maddening Visions. It's a basic action. It says nearby enemies find themselves struck by nightmarish apparitions as the Cult Witch begins to conduit it for unfettered warp energy. Until the end phase of this round, make a willpower check for any enemy fighters who ends their turn within 3 inches of the Cult Witch. If the check has failed, the fighter is driven temporarily insane. This can be marked by placing a sanity marker on their fighter card. Now, in my opinion, Maddening Visions is a number 2 power pick. Aside from Dark Shield, your probably second best pick would be Maddening Visions. And the reason why is because you could always pair this your witch with your best with the best fighter, for example. So ideally, a Chaos Spawn or some other brute. This way that if the brute or the spawn or the fighter you're with gets charged against, the witch can then be within ability of this range and then make all your enemies subject to insanity. Which could be really great because if you get a low score on the insanity roll, they either break because they fail a nerf test, or better yet, they can come under your control. If you can actually control them, you can do a lot of cool things with that. You can make them jump off of buildings, jump into dangerous terrain. You can make them throw grenades at their own friends, or fire at their own friends, or even fight their own friends as well. They're completely under your command at that point, which is absolutely fantastic. So like I said before, pair your witch with like a brute or a Chaos Spawn or some really impressive fighter, something that enemies are going to try to swarm against to do this. Trigger this Maddening Visions ability, and you can potentially control these guys and make them do horrible things to their own allies, which is just all kinds of fun. Power number 6 is a Sail. It is another basic action to cast this, and it says the Cult Witch uses the force of their will to push enemies and objects from their path. Immediately make a ranged attack against an enemy fighter within 12 inches and line of sight. If hit, move the target D3 inches in any direction. If they were standing, they become prone and pinned after moving. If they come into base contact with a standing fighter or any terrain, they stop moving and suffer a strength 3 damage 1 hit. If they come into base contact with another fighter, the fighter also suffers a strength 3 damage 1 hit and become prone and pinned. Now, this could be an excellent power. Ideally, it could be, because the way that it's written, it could do some really cool things. Like, for example, you could push people into other people and pin multiple targets at the same time. The only problem, though, is that you gotta use this as a shooting attack, and with a horrible Ballista skill 5+, you're going to be missing a lot with your Sail telekinesis ability. Now, don't get me wrong, I mean, it could be fun to get people off elevator structures or off of vehicles, for example, or, you know, into some kind of dangerous terrain. I mean, that could be hilarious. But unfortunately, your witch is horrible with combat characteristics with the Ballista skills. So I wouldn't really take this ability unless your Ballista skill gets increased over the course of the campaign. Then you might want to take it then, and at that point, then it might be something that might be worthwhile for you. If you're really looking for an effective shooting attack, I would suggest going with the Scouring, because you don't have to take a hit roll with that. It's a template attack, so it automatically hits, and that's the reason why the Scouring is also a better shooting attack than a Sail, in my opinion. So like I said before, in conclusion, the Cult Witch should always be paired up with a Chaos Spawn or a Brute of some sort, so that way they can lend their abilities to help buff up that Chaos Spawn or that Brute, in my opinion. Also, another thing I want to take a look at is getting Chaos Familiars. I must have. Being able to reroll willpower tests for Wyrd Powers. And of course, if you pass a willpower test, you can ignore attacks. That's also really important. At a 72% success rate, you will dodge most attacks coming your way. And you should always go for the maximum amount for Chaos Familiars for your Witch. The 25 credits a pop, so not very expensive, so you should be able to do that. And of course, if I had to rank the abilities about which would be the best abilities to have for your Cult Witch, this is the order I would go in. I would definitely go with Dark Shield, just because giving that +1 armor save is like amazing, and plus it does it for all fighters with 3 inches. After that, I would suggest doing Maddening Visions, Being able to put Insanity upon your opponents is always a lot of fun as well. I would take the Scouring because the Scouring is an automatic strength 2 flamer attack. Now the strength 2 may or may not wound your opponents, but that Blaze attack actually has a 50-50 chance of sending your characters to enemies to flee away from being blazed, so that's a really good power as well. Levitation's also another good one as well, because that way you can travel freely across the battlefield to keep up with your Brute or your Chaos Spawn. That might be something you want to get there. Warp Strength would also be kind of good too. Same thing with the Assail power through Telekinesis. That'd be my very last one, just because you have that horrible Blizzard skill to start off with. And like I said before, of course, this is just my opinion on this. You can choose whatever psychic ability that you matches your playstyle the best. It's entirely your choice. But in case you're on the fence or not really sure what to use, may I suggest using the powers in this order. So there you guys have it. That's good for this video. As always, please feel free to like, comment, and or subscribe. You guys' input is valuable to us as always. Also check us out on Facebook, Instagram, as well as blogger.com for all the greatest hobby news related to this channel. That's good for this week, guys. I'll catch you guys next one. Peace out and stay classy.